Everyone always talks about the dollar dying. And every few years, some economist with a podcast and a Substack writes a 47-part thread about how the US dollar is about to collapse and gold is going to the moon. And they've been saying it for 30 years. And they've been wrong for 30 years. So, no, this video is not about the dollar dying. Because the dollar isn't dying. But the weapon that made it the most powerful currency in human history, that's a different story. And that weapon is something most people have never heard of. It's not crypto. It's not China. And it's not Jerome Powell doing whatever Jerome Powell does. It's something that was invented in a parking lot deal in the Saudi Arabian desert in 1974. And for the past 50 years, it has quietly forced every nation on earth to keep buying dollars whether they wanted to or not. And it's called the Petrodollar system. And it is slowly being dismantled. But to understand why the Petrodollar system matters, you first have to go back to 1944. Because in 1944, the world was a mess. World War II was winding down. Europe was in ruins, and the global economy needed a new financial framework to rebuild around. So 44 nations got together in a small resort town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods, and they made a deal. Every country would peg their currency to the US dollar, and the US dollar would be pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. It was a clean system. The dollar became the anchor of the entire global economy. And America, sitting on the largest gold reserves in the world, was more than happy to oblige. But here's the problem with promising the world you'll exchange dollars for gold on demand. Eventually, someone calls your bluff. And in 1971, Richard Nixon called the whole thing off. He ended dollar convertibility to gold in a 15-minute televised address that most Americans watched and immediately forgot about. This became known as the Nixon Shock. And overnight, the dollar lost its golden backbone. Without gold backing, there was nothing fundamentally forcing the world to hold dollars anymore. And that was a serious problem. Because if the world stops needing dollars, America stops being able to print money and export its consequences to everyone else. The privilege that built the American empire was suddenly in jeopardy. So the United States did what it does best. It improvised. And in 1974, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia and made a deal that would quietly reshape the entire global financial system. The terms were simple. Saudi Arabia would agree to price all of its oil exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, the United States would provide military protection and weapon sales to the Saudi government. And just like that, the petrodollar system was born. And the genius of this arrangement was almost diabolical. Meet Ahmed. Ahmed runs the finance ministry of a mid-sized country that imports oil. Ahmed's country needs oil to run its economy, and oil is priced in dollars. So Ahmed's country needs to hold dollars, not because they love America, not because they trust the Federal Reserve, but because if they want to keep the lights on and the trucks moving, they have no other choice. And Ahmed's country is not alone. Because when Saudi Arabia locked oil pricing to the dollar, it effectively created a permanent source of global dollar demand. Every oil importing nation on earth suddenly needed a reserve of US dollars. And the more oil the world consumed, the more dollars the world needed. And the more dollars the world needed, the more US Treasury bonds those countries bought to park their dollar reserves safely. It was a self-reinforcing loop that gave America an extraordinary privilege. The ability to run deficits, print money, and finance its debt cheaply because the entire world was essentially a captive buyer of American financial assets. Warren Buffett once described it as America receiving a massive interest-free loan from the rest of the world simply by virtue of the dollar being the global reserve currency. And he was right, because for 50 years, the petrodollar system meant that global oil demand was essentially a tax the world paid to fund American economic dominance. But now, for the first time in half a century, the foundation of that system is developing serious cracks. In 2023, Saudi Arabia began accepting Chinese yuan as payment for oil sold to China. Read that sentence again. The country that shook hands with Henry Kissinger in 1974 and promised to price oil only in dollars is now accepting a competing currency for oil transactions. And Saudi Arabia is not alone. Russia, Iran, the UAE, and Brazil have all been actively expanding trade in non-dollar currencies. The BRICS nations, which now represent over 40% of global GDP, have been openly discussing the creation of a new trade settlement currency specifically designed to bypass the dollar entirely. And the numbers back this up. In 2001, the US dollar made up 73% of global foreign exchange reserves. Today, that number has fallen to around 58%. It is still dominant, but the trend is moving in one direction only. Now, here's where it stops being a geopolitics story and starts being a personal finance story. Because if global dollar demand structurally weakens, the consequences are not abstract. They land directly on your mortgage rate, your grocery bill, and your investment portfolio. Think about what persistent dollar demand has done for America. It has allowed the U.S. Treasury to borrow money cheaply for decades because there was always a line of foreign buyers willing to absorb U.S. debt. But if that line gets shorter, Treasury yields have to rise to attract new buyers. And if Treasury yields rise, mortgage rates follow, corporate borrowing costs follow, and the Federal Reserve finds itself stuck between fighting inflation and preventing a debt spiral at the same time. It is the kind of bind that does not end quietly. And this is exactly what Ray Dalio has been warning about. He has repeatedly pointed to the structural decline of dollar dominance as one of the most underappreciated risks in global finance. Not because the dollar collapses overnight, but because the slow erosion of its monopoly on global trade settlement removes the invisible subsidy that has allowed America to live beyond its means for generations. When that subsidy shrinks, the cost of everything goes up, and the margin for error in U.S. fiscal policy goes to zero. And here is the uncomfortable truth that nobody in traditional financial media wants to say out loud. The dollar is not losing a currency war. It is losing something more subtle and more dangerous. It is losing its monopoly on necessity. For 50 years, the world needed dollars the same way it needed oxygen. Not because the dollar was the best currency, but because oil left them no choice. And the moment that necessity weakens, even slightly, the entire architecture of American financial privilege starts to shift. It does not happen in a press conference. It does not trend on Twitter. It happens slowly in bilateral trade agreements, in quiet central bank reallocation decisions, and in handshakes made in languages Jerome Powell does not speak. And that is why this channel exists, because the risks that actually matter are never the loud ones. The loud ones are already priced in. The real risks are the ones hiding underneath 50-year-old deals made in the Saudi desert that nobody bothered to explain to you. So if you want to stay ahead of the financial stories that traditional media will not touch until it is too late, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we will keep covering the things that actually